Hello, I'm Dr. Kevin Downing, and we've been talking about the four conflict styles that best predict divorce and, of course, kill marital happiness. We've been using the PrEP approach, Prevention and Relationship Enhancement Program by Scott Stanley, and we've talked about a general overview. We've talked about escalation, the very first conflict style, and we determined that there really is nothing fruitful or helpful about escalation and gave you some tips on how to eliminate that. And by the way, let me say that if you are stuck with escalation and you just can't get out of it, by all means, go and get some professional help. Get some counseling. It is destructive to your marriage. So the second one that we want to go to, the second conflict style that best predicts divorce, and that we of course want to eliminate, is called withdrawal. Withdrawal. And what is withdrawal? Withdrawal is the Cold War, the silent treatment, the not talking, stonewalling, the cold shoulder, just that deathly, icy silence. And why is that? Why does that come up as one of the four best predictors of divorce? What is so terrible about not talking and being isolated? Well, it brings up a lot of anxiety. If you were in a group of people and there were 10 people and 9 people were just pouring out their hearts and kind of spilling their guts, and there was one person who was rather quiet, maybe held their nose up in the air, everybody would project on them and say, "Oh my gosh, they think we're crazy," and they think we're, and so when the whiteboard is blank, we tend to project the worst. You're thinking of leaving me. You're thinking of divorcing me. You hate me. You can't stand me. And of course, the other marriage partner says, "I didn't even say any of that." But it's just human nature to dump all of our anxieties and our worst fears when there's a blank slate. I counseled a fellow one time, and he would come to work. He was the head of his department, all right? He'd come to work, he'd slip into his chair, turn on his computer, work for 8 hours, and then turn his computer off and go home. I said, "You can't do that. That is not going to work." Why? Because all the people under you are thinking, "Oh my gosh, he doesn't like us. He's not talking to us." And so you get the idea. There's just, I said, even if you just come in and say, "Gee, it's a nice blue sky out there. It's a nice day," or just say, "How are you?" That brings people's anxiety way, way down. So a marriage, the great expectation of marriage is that we have some kind of emotional intimacy. It's an emotional relationship where we connect, where we bond. And when there's silence, and we don't know when that silence is going to end, and when that silence is going to be resolved, and the rejection that's attached to that silence, it is incredibly, incredibly stressful on a marriage. It's one of the deepest rejections, when we feel rejected and shut off by our mate. So we want to come together. If you are an extreme introvert, and there are many out there, it's imperative that, because we hear introverts say, "Well, it's just not the way I am. I just don't talk." Well, guess what? You signed up for marriage, and you do have to do some talking. Actions are wonderful and necessary. You do need to talk. You just do need to talk. That's part of the package that comes along with marriage. So let's talk about some interventions and creating some emotional intimacy and some communication. And the first one is one of the most basic communication exercises of all time. Just about anything that has to do with marriage communication, with increasing and improving it, has to do with changing the punctuation of how we talk to each other. Not just that we do talk to each other, but how we talk to each other. So this whole thing of attack, defend, shuffling through your problems like a deck of cards, then reshuffling through them again and going away bloody and beat up. These are distracting. Or there's the monologue, where stereotypically it's the wife, sometimes it's the husband, but the wife will talk on for 45 minutes, say the same thing 14 different ways, and the husband kind of goes off and he's disassociating out onto the golf course, this kind of thing. And at the end she says, "Now tell me what I said." "I don't know." "See, you still weren't listening." And so that's not communicating. And that's also a way kind of withdrawing as well too. So you might hear of active listening, reflective listening. In the PrEP approach we call it speaker listener. But it's a way of changing the punctuation of how we talk to each other. And it's also a skill that develops listening in a very, very deep and very powerful way. The mission of speaker-listener is understanding. And it's very interesting that in understanding, there's about 70% of your marriage problems dissipate. They're finished. They're off the table when you really understand each other. When you listen and you listen very carefully and you understand where your mate is coming from. And it's very interesting because we, especially as guys, we like to fix stuff. Let's just fix it. Before we understand, we like to fix. And that can be very problematic and can be very damaging. So the power of just understanding is really, really important. When we look at it through spiritual lenses, we could call it incarnational communication. We remember one of the great spiritual truths is that God takes on the form of human flesh and walks among us in the form of Jesus Christ. And we have a great high priest, it says, who can sympathize with all of our weaknesses, tempted in every way, yet without sin. And we can boldly come before the throne of grace. There's a connection there that happens because of great understanding. And if God were to say, hey, I went to great lengths to understand you, to get into your world, and to take on the form of human flesh, I'd like for you to go to great lengths and get into your mate's world and really understand them. No, you're not the other sex, you're not the other person, but as much as humanly possible, I want you to get into your mate's world and really understand where they're coming from. And if you write them off and you say, oh, they're just controlling, they're obsessive, she's high maintenance, he's a narcissist, that is not a way of really understanding your mate. We'll talk a little bit more about that when it comes to our third conflict style, invalidation. But let's finish off with speaker-listener. So one person is the speaker and one person is the listener. And I do have a little handout for this as well too. You can go to the website and look under speaker-listener and you can have a little handout that will help guide you through this. And the speaker is going to speak for themselves. You're going to use I messages versus you messages. I messages tend to open people up. I was curious. I was wondering. I feel hurt. I feel joy. I feel sorrow. I feel alone. You can hear how this brings somebody in. You messages tend to close people down. You always, you never, you won't. And you can see how that puts people on the defensive. So you're going to use I messages. You're going to speak for yourself. And get this, it's only 1 to 3 sentences. Why only 1 to 3 sentences? Because that's about all the human mind seems to be able to understand when it comes to these human relationships, these marriage relationships that we have. The listener is going to respond, and by the way, I like for you to write down what your mate says. You lose some eye contact because you're looking down on the page, but we write down things that are important, and what your mate says to you is very important. So write it down, and you have a written record there that you can also review at a later time. Another little thing I like to tweak on it and use is I like for you to underline the feeling words that your mate's sharing with you. Why? Because we're after emotional intimacy. It's so very, very important. So you're going to respond with, the listener's going to respond with, after those 1 to 3 sentences, I'm hearing you say. Excuse me, I'm hearing you say, and I'm hearing you say that you're hurt about this, or you're concerned about us in this area, or you're feeling this, or you're feeling that. You're going to listen for the bullseye. That's when your mate says, thumbs up, green light, correct, you got it, that's right, you heard me right. So that's the green light. And then you're going to say, then the listener's going to respond and ask one more question, that is there more? Is there more? Don't say, you got anything else to say? No, say, is there more? You want to be inviting. And more than likely, your mate will say, why, yes, there is. And another 1 to 3 sentences. You go for the bullseye, the green light again. And you can go on several rounds like that. And then you're going to trade the floor back and forth. Somebody will have that handout page. You can call that the floor. Some people use a little piece of carpeting, call it the floor. The American Indians have the talking stick. Whoever has the stick gets to talk, and everybody else listens. You know, this kind of thing. So there's something physical there. Some people talking to their pen like a microphone. It's kind of funny. And so you politely trade the floor back and forth. If in your marriage you have the ability, you're stuck, you're not understanding each other, and if you can take out the floor and hand that to your mate and say, listen, I want to give you my full, undivided attention. I want to listen to you 100% for the next 20 minutes. That is one powerful tool you have in your marriage toolbox.